Just hopping in up top to note that I very much consider this a pilot for how we want to wrap these series up. In this episode, Jess and I are very focused on narrowing down everything we've talked to into one specific idea and getting it on paper. It's much more goal-oriented and restricted than the initial episodes we had, those conversations we had with Will and Dora. And as we kept recording these initial episodes and developed the show's premise, we realized that, I guess in retrospect, unsurprisingly, it's way more fun to just let the conversation stay sprawling and overambitious. There is definitely good discussion in here, and Jess has her microphone turned the correct direction, so the audio quality takes a pretty big jump up. But it is different from even just the series that we've already recorded, and it will be even more different than the series that we will be recording from this point forward. And I just wanted to say so, because I'm excited. This episode is good, and I'm excited for the other ones, and I'm excited you're here. Thank you for tuning in. Looking forward to being able to use these episodes to continue the conversations we started in the other episodes and to have conversations with listeners of the show, especially through a feature we're having on the Patreon where you can send in a little voice message and we'll chat about your ideas. Whatever. You can go check that out. Just gonna hand this one over to Nicky. Shout out to Nicky. God, this song is good. Welcome to This Should Be a Game, a podcast about adaptive media and filtering 90% of your life experiences through tabletop role-playing games. I'm Satah, I use they, them pronouns. You can find me on Bluesky at posatachips.gaygothvibes.online or check out my website at gaygothvibes.online. I never let myself redo plugs when I stumble over my Bluesky name because it's my fault that it's that long and stupid, and so I don't deserve to redo it. The mistakes stay in. I made this bed. Segue, mission control. I'm just waking up from my nap in mission control. There were alarms going off everywhere.
It's on fire, it might explode.
A surprise vessel has re-entered Atmo, that of course contains my co-host, Jess Levine. Jess, where can people find you?
Besides potentially burning up an atmosphere, they can find me pretty much anywhere as jessfrom.online. My website is jessfrom.online. I'm on Bluesky as at jessfrom.online. You can also find me as Jumpgate Games, like jumpgategames.itch.io. And that's pretty much everywhere.
Wonderful. This is the third and final episode of our series where we are using the 2013 movie Gravity as a jumping off point to design a tabletop role-playing game. On our first episode, we had Will Yobst, and then we had Dee Rogers, and those episodes were such incredible conversations, and they went in such different directions for sort of just like big structural stuff, and a bunch of different elements that can be part of this game, and I think would be really fun to work towards. Today, sitting down with you, we're going to just talk about what we know about the game so far, synthesizing all of it, and see what that creates, what game comes out of this conversation. You know, making a game, game design?
Game design. I really like what you're saying. It almost makes me think about the idea of like treating these episodes as like a palette of things that we are drawing upon as we are boiling down into a game. And I think that's a really productive way to take such expansive conversations about game design, because when you're early in a game process, you're also throwing a lot at the wall, right? And then those are things that you draw upon as you then actually make the game object that is the rule book and stuff like that.
Yes.
And so that feels like a really exciting approach.
Because it's fun to talk about games, and so it's really easy to let the scope just widen a lot, and that's awesome and good. We're gonna try and just figure out what we can do with all of our cool ideas. So we know it's in space.
That's important.
We got people in space, and they are going through situations.
Also important.
We know that it's gonna have mini games. Some of them, or possibly even the majority of them, are going to have some sort of like physical element to them. There's going to be flicking and throwing dice. There's going to be stacking dice. Characters are going to have an object, a die or something that represents a resource that they have or a skill that they have, and then they're going to manipulate those dice. Ooh, I will just simply only get my pluralization of die and dice right about 60% of the 40 to 60% of the time. So we know that people are going to have dice that are in some way assigned to their character, and then they are manipulating them in mini games. These mini games are going to be events. They're going to be, I think, they have sort of a full gradient of what they are, right? There's sort of the like, well, you need to put the communicator inside the satellite that you're working on. And then sort of the further you get into the game, the more and more high stakes they are. They are crises. You're navigating your shuttle that's out of gas. You're trying to use your jetpack to spacewalk over to a new station. And one of the things that other than like the dice and the resources that characters have, one of the things that they use to succeed and to hopefully ultimately meet the goal of getting back to Earth is that they have tethers to each other. I think one of the things we'll need to decide on is just like getting a little bit more concrete about how tethers are created and destroyed, right? But we know that one of the big things about this game is that characters can die, characters will die, and then that player picks up sort of like a setting element, or they move into sort of a more asymmetric world encompassing role. But their character can also come back, whether that's literally as a ghost, whether it's a vision, whether it's just a memory. And in some way, that allows them to, like, the characters who are still alive are tethered to those people and can maybe use their skills or can pick up a habit, and then you can use that to, you can be like, oh, well, I get an advantage in this mini game because I inherited, like, I picked up my friend's annoying habit of chewing on my pen or whatever, you know? Yeah. It's just very metaphorical of, like, the thing that will help the last person, probably. I think we might develop this more, but I think the general idea to start with is that only one person makes it back to Earth.
Yes, exactly.
And they manage to do that based off of the strength of the connections that they've built with other people.
Yeah.
What am I missing?
I think that's pretty much everything. I know we did talk with Will about this visualization of, like, rings and people, like, moving down towards the center, and maybe, like, danger encroaching from the outside.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe that's a way that we're thinking about or visualizing succeeding on these mini games and, like, coming back in towards Earth. It's just something to keep in the back of our minds.
Yeah, I really like that visual because I do think that just that the orbiting thing, like, and that feeling of, like, trying to get closer to Earth and playing off of the fact that in the movie, you know, there's this orbit that they're trying to escape of the trash. I really like that. I think there's a lot of things that we've talked about that we also talked about off mic briefly before this that are, like, things that will be really cool to work towards, but that we don't necessarily want to have as strictures, because we want to, like, totally. You know, stuff like playmat stuff and game object stuff, like, we want to start from a place of, like, utility, and then hopefully it ends up looking cool. But I think just, yeah, I'm glad you brought up the rings, just because I love that visual, and I also just love the visual that no one else saw of Will just, like, gently holding up a piece of paper with a little dart board on it every time it came up is very stuck in my head.
And, like, what you're saying there about almost, like, working backwards, right? Of, like, well, what do we need for these mini games to work?
Yeah.
And then that's what ends up on the player HUD, and that's what ends up in these meta level progression things. I
Yeah.
think is a really, really good approach.
Yeah. Okay. So given all of that, what do we want to focus on? I know that you've been thinking a lot about minigame stuff. I know that you have ideas you're really excited about, especially when it comes to thinking of like flipping through the book and having to do fiddly little physical stuff. I know that there's a lot of stuff there that you're really interested in. I do want to flag, I would love to find a way that this game can still be playable at a distance, in part because I would love to playtest it with you.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I think that is just back of the mind, not super important. I think what that would probably mean just is that there's just going to be a print and play
100%
type of thing. You can play it with people who aren't physically with you, but you will probably need to print stuff. Or good luck tabletop simulator. I don't know.
Yeah, totally.
But so I know that you're really excited about minigame stuff. And so I think you just getting a few of those down on the page sounds really good to me. I'm interested in looking at some of the relational character buildy, prompty type stuff. And I also would love to talk with you just about sketching out a list of events, because there is the sense of like, this is not a GM'd game. This is an asymmetric game, but there isn't somebody who is sitting down and going, here's the problem, solve it. We're providing in the game text a lot of the problems that then players are like navigating themselves. And I have some sense of what some of those problems can be because we watched a movie. That's part of the podcast. But I would love to hear some of your ideas about what those challenges could be. The reason I'm bringing this up here is because I think having a good idea of that will give us a good direction to go. So if we can just sketch, and at any point, let me know if you have a totally different idea of how we can approach this. The thing I want to suggest for how we sort of approach just like getting the first stuff down on paper is treating the game as like kind of linear. There's a crisis or there's an event, and then something happens, and then you trigger another event, and we sort of see like in a given game, what route do the people go down? And I think just starting with a pretty simple linear progression will help us write stuff that's pretty concrete, and we'll just go in with the assumption that it won't be linear, that actually there will be like a lot of options for people to choose from or stumble on or whatever, and we can just sort of expand it from there. Does that make sense? Does that sound good as like a direction
Basically,
to go?
Starting with a linear design for the sake of getting a thing that is concrete and playtestable, with the understanding that like there are a lot of branch points that can then be added into that linear design. Is that?
Yeah.
I like that a lot because it keeps, like we talked at the beginning about how like, well, maybe you make a crisis roll between mini games, and whether or not you get a crisis determines whether like which mini game you move to next. And like the idea of like this very Firebrandsy, there's a huge collection of mini games and you don't know which one is coming next. But that is a really difficult meta level progression topic to tackle at the beginning when you're just trying to see like, does this minigame structure work? And so the idea that we start out with a linear progression of minigames, and then we would be able to return and revisit and say, okay, how do we make these minigames flow out of order? How do we do some sort of partial ordering, which was a thing I was already thinking about like, well, these ones can follow these ones, but these ones have to happen. There's checkpoints, there's milestones. All of that doesn't have to exist to get a game to the table. And so we just have this linear version that these events happen, and those branches represent things that we could bounce off of and take those existing ideas later. I love that, if that's what you mean.
Yeah. No, that sounds great. And I think just, not getting into the weeds, simply not. I'm not doing it, but just generally thinking of it as like what you said about sort of, some amount of forced linearity in like, this game can only happen after this game. That's going to be really easy if we just split them up into manuals, kind of like is in the, when you're below a certain number of crisis points, you're playing games from the blue manual. When you're after a certain number of crisis points, you're playing them from the yellow manual, whatever, you know, like we will find ways to move people along, but I think starting with the linear one, we will be able to hopefully get a sense of where we should have those break points.
100% yes, absolutely.
Okay.
And for me, some of what events there are follow from like mini games that I'm excited to write and how they easily like metaphorize to particular events.
Yeah, tell me about it.
Okay. One mini game I've been so excited is operating a spaceship in a language that you don't know. Will and I were getting super excited about that, and I have a concrete idea for a mini game based on that. And so that involves flying a spaceship. And I think I want to follow the movie a lot here just because I find it as useful creative constraint, even if we don't have to. Like, it's what we're doing, and it's also just so useful. There's so much of people being tied together and having to deal with inertia, as Will would label it, and like their tether is making it harder or making it easier. So something to do with people in zero gravity struggling to get to a place and be connected or not connected to each other. I know that's like really, I'm not finding an elegant sentence for it, but that feels like a really thematic way. So you've got we're on a spacewalk and we're struggling with the concept of gravity. And maybe if I'm linearizing this, if I'm trying to really drill down to something linear, there's that, and that gets you onto a thing. And then we've got the operating a thing that you don't know the language for, which could easily follow from there. And then we know, actually probably what would have been easier than either of these is working backwards from our goal, which is being on the ground. And so once you know how to operate a thing that you don't have the language for, you gotta land the thing. Like, get safely through the atmosphere and onto the ground. To me, that's like an easy, if we want to target 3 mini games in our initial set, like spacewalk, operate weird machine, land that machine. That is a little weighted to not being free floating out in space, which is so much of the time. I also imagine we talked a bunch with Dora about the idea of like character creation itself being partially a mini game. Like there's a little bit that starts pre-game, but then you're fleshing it out in mini game. And so like you were saying about like installing the comms array, I'm realizing I'm sort of thinking about 3 crises. If we wanted to aim for like 1 pre-crisis mini game and then 3 crises, we have some task in space, and then those were 3 crises I was pitching.
Yeah, I would love to expand it slightly if we think it's reasonable, just because I'm realizing that I would really the spacewalk and the free floating nature I think is an important element, and so I think I would love to see there's sort of the start of the game, character creation, doing your task stuff, and then I would love to see, I think, a location, a spacewalk, a location, a spacewalk, a location, land.
Interesting. Yeah, absolutely. When we say a location,
I'm thinking a shuttle, a station, a satellite, other S space words.
and each of the spacewalks has sort of different mechanics for what the challenge on that spacewalk is. Like, it's not the same game. Yeah. I don't think that's hard, because I was also immediately thinking again about, like, what are the different challenges in a spacewalk? There's, we're tied together and we're trying to navigate. There's, we're super far apart. Sandra Bullock's character is a million miles from George Clooney's character, and then he finds her and brings her back. And so I think I love that structure of, like, spacewalky minigame in a thing minigame, spacewalky minigame in a thing minigame.
Yeah. I've written down basically what I said there of, like, just that sort of progression, starting tasks, there's a crisis, and then we have a series of mini games. And I think that one of the things I'm interested in is that, how do you feel about the idea that, at least to start, as a general rule, relational prompts happen during spacewalks?
Interesting. Yeah, totally.
Or at least, it doesn't necessarily have to be during spacewalks. I think what I'm looking for is something to grab onto for some of the stuff I want to work on, the like relational prompty charactery stuff, where that fits in here. And so one of the things I'm thinking of is just like having at least to start an idea of like when that happens. When are you answering those questions versus when are you paying them off? And I think it isn't actually like, you know, station versus spacewalk. I think it's probably crisis versus not downtime, but if there's a word for the hurry up and wait portions, just because a lot of the relational stuff in the movie, it's moments of tension, but it's not the big dramatic moments. You know, there's a lot of like when they have time to talk, they talk.
Yes. And like, but the like loud punctuated by silence is such a big part of the movie and like what's so striking about it. I had been envisioning these prompts coming up in the mini games always as like ways to cheat, and we talked about like the doing simultaneous.
Can we find another word that isn't cheat?
Yeah, totally.
I keep rubbing against that word because it has a certain like getting away with somethingness that I don't feel is quite, and this is essentially meaningless. It's literally, can we just use a slightly different word for the exact same thing?
Yeah, I'd always been thinking of these relational movements as coming up as like how you got to make an exception to the rules, to like the normal rules of the scenario. Like normally this is how you interact with it. Cool, have a relational moment to get to do some super powerful thing that like breaks those rules. But I think that approach doesn't necessarily simulate that increase and decrease of like noise and tension in a way that I think is actually really good. So you saying that like has me rethinking some of that.
I also don't want them to be optional. And if someone is really good at the tasks and just never has to use a prompt, that is not good to me.
Totally interesting. Do you have thoughts on then like where that goes in?
No, I mean nothing more than what I said at the beginning of just like maybe they're in spacewalks or something. And I think one of the problems, just purely for working on it right now, I don't think that I can craft prompts that fit into mini games before the mini games exist, or I have an idea of what they are. And so maybe what this means is I will just focus on something else while you do some minigame stuff, and then we'll sort of like fill that in after.
Yeah, that totally works. Especially if like you're so good at character creation in general and like fleshing out a character and like prompting in that process. If you want to take some of the like character creation and first minigame stuff, and then maybe I can do some of the like later mini games and work backwards towards you, and then we come together and play off each other and fill things in.
We can try it.
Okay. You want to do that?
Yeah.
Hell yeah.
All right, we're going to put 10 minutes on the clock and just do a little writing. That's 10 minutes. Do we want 10 more?
Yes, please.
Yep. That's 10. 10 more?
I think 5 more. I'll only probably be done 2 of them, but I feel like that's enough to then start collaborating and talking, unless you want to do 10 more.
Let's do 10 more.
Cool. Sounds good.
Okay.
Okay. I think I'm good. I just need like 30 seconds to finish writing down what's in my head.
All right. So we did some quiet work for half an hour, wrote some stuff out. I think I have a basic concept I can present, and then we can sort of take a look at the mini games.
Go for it.
The idea I have is there will be a few more elements to this, but one of the things that I've written is essentially when you begin, the first thing you do with your character is just figure out your job. You know, why are you here? And that is both like a category and a specialty. So you might be a technician and your specialty might be communication systems, or it might be the engine. You might be a researcher and you are studying biology or geology or botany. And this just sort of like everybody has their job and everyone knows each other's jobs. that is like public
Totally.
information from the very beginning. And that sort of helps you figure out what you're even doing at the beginning. If you have somebody who is an engine technician and you have a biologist, you might have found like you might be fixing a broken shuttle. Maybe you were on your way to a planet to study something. Maybe you are like returning from a research mission and you are fixing this engine that is broken down. And I think there will be some guidance in there of like, if your job is this, then probably your first tasks are a specific thing.
Totally. But like sort of the connecting thread of what you're doing is something the players are coming up with based on like the overlap between their jobs, is what you're saying there?
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, I love that.
Just to sort of at the very beginning being like, what is the opening scene? Like what do we and I do think I like the idea that we're starting in media res, right? Like
totally.
Something maybe it's even worth establishing something has already gone wrong when we open the game.
Interesting. Yeah.
Because like that's true of the movie, you know, they're up there fixing something. And so I think just establishing something has already broken down, but it isn't an emergency.
Oh,
and
yes,
it's just like
a minor issue.
What are you working on? And then I think people will choose a starting sort of like independent mini games did not have time to write out, but everyone will have like a little task that they're working on. And there will be conversation while that's happening. And one of the things that I'm thinking is that at the very beginning, I've started this big list of character details. And those are things that we've discussed like habits, relationship status, and stuff that's based off of some of the character stuff that really stood out to me from the movie. Like my favorite part about being in space is this. And what I'm thinking is that at the very beginning, everyone defines some details about their character, but they are all private until prompted.
Yeah, interesting. Totally.
So I'm an engine technician, and being in space is brand new and terrifying. My favorite part about space is the view. My least favorite part about space is the silence. And I have a habit of drumming with anything that I'm holding. Pens.
Cute.
Weapons. That's not what I'm... The thing that... Tools is what I was thinking. And so you know those things about yourself. You don't explicitly share them until prompted. And what I'm thinking for that is that that's just built into the mini games. There's like, you know, sit here, roll 3 dice. Based off of that, ask a question or just offer. Maybe it's even like once you do your starting mini game, you just kind of offer out of nowhere. Yeah, I'm like drumming on everything, you know? And that is offering those details is either done on your end or prompted by somebody else. And those are the things that start creating those tethers and those connections between people. And I think one of the ideas I'm really excited about is tables of anecdotes. Like I have a, 3-part Mad Libs style table that I'm looking at that has options like I worked with the president and they owe me a huge favor, or I went to high school with a tech entrepreneur and we did not like each other. Those kind of things. Just having little tables that can generate those little like backstory elements that you can either bring up in a moment of high tension because they're helpful, or you can just bring up as like a distraction, like having them be like,
oh, that multifaceted nature of them is really good.
Yeah. And I would really like to build things that are doing both. And I think a lot of this stuff, like not everything will be actionable in a way that it will create a tether. You might just learn something about somebody. You might learn somebody's relationship status. You might learn that they were recently widowed or that they are happily divorced or happily married, I guess. But, whatever. And you might learn these little things. You might learn someone's favorite song and why it is their favorite song. It might remind them of somebody, or they might just really like it, or it might have been playing at a birthday party, their best birthday party ever. And I think that there will be a lot of like figuring out how that stuff can be useful in those moments of crisis, whether it's just emotional support or whether it is like an actual skill or something, is cool to me. And one of the things that this does not tackle is the idea of stats or dice or anything. I think that probably what that will come from is the jobs, right? Like we'll figure out, here are the 10 things, and you will get a certain size of die in each based off of your job and some other backstory type stuff, but not 100% sure yet. That's where I'm at with this. What do you got?
First, just want to say the stuff that you said there about like these can be shared as a distraction or they can be shared as a helpful tip in a minigame to do a thing was immediately so inspirational for me, and answers it gives me ideas for stuff that I left as open questions when I was working. And
Cool.
So I'm going to revisit some of the stuff you said there. And then as far as stats, my current designs that I'm about to go over do not call for stats at any point. And they all assume that you have a set of 7 polyhedral dice.
Yes. When I say
and
stats, that's kind of what I mean. Like, what are those dice? You know?
Yes. Currently, I am always referring to them as your O2, but then you're spending them to do different things depending on the scenario.
Okay.
And so they are simultaneously the amount of O2 left in your tank, but then also the thing you're using them for. And I'll go over how that manifests in each game. And that doesn't have to stick as a meta way of doing it. It's just sort of, there's going to be a couple different like unifying things between the 3 mini games I've written that don't have to be rules for every mini game. They were just the constraints I worked under while sketching. So I've written 3 mini games, 2 of which are spacewalks and 1 of which is like on a thing.
Okay.
And for each of them, I've attempted to do like, this is the rule read at the beginning. I literally labeled it mission control because we talked at one point about the idea that the book is voice as mission control.
Yeah.
And then for 2 of 3 of them, I have also written, here are things that like prompts or tethers could allow you to do. And I've just written like a list of questions of like, do we want him to do this? Do we want him to do this? And I think answering those questions might actually come from the things you said about like, are you sharing a distraction? Are you sharing a tip?
Mm-hmm.
But we'll get back to that. I'm going to just go sort of in detail over each game, if that sounds good.
Yeah.
Cool. So the first spacewalk game I wrote was Tool Toss. And this is on the lower end of stakes of the games. And there is like a map split into quadrants. It could be similar to Will's bullseye or something like that. And each astronaut rolls their D4 on the map below, representing their position in space and the tool they need. And so like you throw your D4 onto the map, and if it's a 3, you need a tool that is a 3. And we could literally have a table of what tool that is. It's up to us. And then whatever quadrant that die lands in, that's where you are. To give an astronaut the tool they need, you must take a die from your O2, toss it onto that map, and it has to land in their quadrant and have the same result. And so, if so, they succeed at their task, they grab that die, take it off the map, they use the tool, and they've succeeded. And if everyone does that before the timer runs out, you all did your task, you succeed at tool toss.
Mm-hmm.
Astronauts can throw dice whenever they want, and if it knocks another die, it actually physically moved that tool or that person. They bounced off each other.
Mm-hmm.
And if it changed the result, that's what that tool can do now, or that's what that astronaut needs now. And so, like, collisions are in fiction. And then, at any time, you can pick up dice in the same quadrant as the D4 representing your astronaut and throw them again. And that is you grabbing a tool that is near you and then like, oh, I don't need that one. Throw it over to someone else.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's just a bunch of people picking up dice and throwing them again, trying to get them in the same quadrant as the right person with the right result before the time runs out.
Mm-hmm.
This is the one that I don't have specific ideas for how the prompts come in, but there's a lot of possibility with like, you can just place it in the right place, or you can use something that is 2 dice results away from what you need because you figure out how to kludge it. Or reducing someone's stress level, letting them take a die and put it back in their like O2, because we talked about O2 and stress is connected. This is the one I was working on last, so I don't have as solid an idea of it.
Okay.
But good to go on to the next one?
Mm-hmm.
Cool. This is Lost in Space. You randomly select a player to be the lone astronaut who is Sandra Bullock far away from everybody else, and the goal is to locate and retrieve them. The others are the searching astronauts, and both the lone astronaut and the group of searching astronauts have a position, a running dice total that represents where they are. If at any point the lone astronaut and the searching astronauts have the same position, they've located them and retrieved them. The lone astronaut can communicate through like in-fiction radio dialogue, like, oh, you seem really far from me, or oh, you're really close, or oh, I see your shuttle moving towards me, or no, you're going too far. You can basically do a hot or colder thing here, because how this works is that the lone astronaut rolls their d20 in Sequit, and that's their initial position, and the other astronauts don't know what their result is. Then the other astronauts, the searching astronauts, take turns. The first one rolls their d20 for their like starting place. So you might have like an 11 and a 17 is your how far apart you are. And each turn, one of the searching astronauts takes a die of their choice from their O2, from their 7 dice, rolls it, and then adds or subtracts it to the ongoing total. And so they might have a 17, and the person's like, I'm not that far away from you. And so they choose to roll their d4, and they get a 3. And they subtract it, and they're like, oh, I can see you coming closer.
Mm-hmm.
And then the next astronaut rolls their die, and they keep doing that, trying to zero in on the position of the lone astronaut.
Mm-hmm.
But if it comes to the lone astronaut's turn, they have to roll one of their die and add it, because they're still drifting. And so their total is actually changing. So like if you've got 4 players, you've got your initial, and then they go 1, 2, 3, and then the position changes, and so it gets harder to zero in on, because once per rotation they actually change. And then if at any point anyone runs out of dice, if their O2 is empty, the search mission is scrubbed because they don't have enough O2 and the lone astronaut dies. And if the timer runs out, the lone astronaut has drifted too far to be located and they die.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's always the lone astronaut who's at risk here.
Mm.
And then finally I had a list of ideas for how prompts or tethers interact mechanically, which is that they could stop the timer temporarily. They could refresh someone's O2, so like let them take dice they've already rolled and put it back in their O2 and essentially reset that resource clock. They could allow more information to be communicated about the number differences. So instead of just saying like, I'm close, I'm far, you can be like, I'm 7 away, or I'm within a D6 away of you. And I really liked what I wrote down while you were talking was the idea of share a distraction to blank, or share a helpful tip to blank, which is to say you have to invoke a detail on your character sheet and share something that is fictionally along these lines to have a specific effect in this scenario. And so share a distraction to make someone consume their O2 slower. They can take a die and put it back in their O2.
Mm-hmm.
Share a helpful tip to help someone use a tool better. They can change the result of their die by 1.
Mm-hmm.
And so you have to have something in your details that allows you to share a helpful tip, or that allows you to share a distraction. And then it's sort of up to the player to fulfill the fictional prompt in a way that lets them do that mechanical thing.
Yeah.
The last one is, as Will was obsessed with, an interface in a foreign language that you don't speak. And so this is for when there's one remaining astronaut and you're trying to fly, I just said the Soyuz spacecraft between the ISS and the Tiangong. It doesn't have to be that. But
It's not going to be that.
To have something yeah.
I would
No,
totally. Just saying there's stuff to talk about, big picture of if we're making an American game.
Oh, 100%.
Because I would like to not, but it also would make sense if it is. And so just being a little more generic would be my preference.
Totally down for generic on like the names of things or whatever. This one does slightly rely on the idea of like a language the players don't speak, which means it would fail for a player who speaks that language.
Yeah.
And I guess, could go the sort of space teamy approach of a nonsense language that doesn't exist, like a set of symbols, a set of orthography that doesn't mean anything.
I feel
that actually
like,
might be the better approach.
Yeah, I think I like that as an idea.
Yeah. So on this page of the manual are the controls of the spacecraft, and each control is basically a slot for a die and a label. And the label is, in this case, I guess, a set of symbols, a word that always appears twice. So, like, if there's 10 controls, there's 2 of each word. So there's 5 words, and each of them appears twice. To successfully pilot the craft, you have to issue 5 correct inputs. A correct input is when a control with the same word has a die with the same face on it.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you had the label apple in whatever language, you need to put a 5 and a 5 in apple and apple.
Mm-hmm.
And each turn, the pilot rolls a die of their choice from their O2 and assigns it to a control. And then anytime they issue a correct input, they get that match, they can take those dice and put them back in their O2. And then this one's really simple. You just need to get those matches in those places. But that's in part because this is at the point where everyone else is dead and everyone else is just helping you. And so prompts or tethers allow them to change the value of dice on the controls, or recover their dice from their controls, or move the dice to a different control, or something like that. And so a lot of how this game works is you're on a timer, rolling dice, trying to locate where are the 2 things with the same word. Just the physical challenge of like, okay, which of these has the same symbols? There and there. Okay, I need to get these there and there. And then the people who are helping you via prompts or tethers or whatever are helping you not fail this obviously impossible otherwise challenge by manipulating your dice or giving you dice back.
Why is it impossible?
Oh, just the idea, like in this version of it, you only get to roll each die once by default. And so you would need, with a set of 7 polyhedral dice, would need to get 5 matches on 7 rolls, plus you get 2 back if you get the same roll. That's almost never going to happen. Like, the probability of that happen is of 10 billion to 1.
So where did the numbers come from in the... How do you know what number you're matching?
The way I'm doing it right now is just that your initial roll, you put one somewhere, and then you just have to put the same number in the other control. And so it's just whatever you roll on your first roll and that you assign to that control. And then if you get something that doesn't match it, you're going to put it in a different control, right? You're not going to put 2 things that don't match on the same control. And so you're sort of setting your targets as you go.
Okay.
You roll a 5 and you put it in apple, and you roll a 12 and you put it in bravo.
And so what if you roll a 19 and then there are no other dice that can do a 19? Then
someone has to do a prompt that allows you to re-roll that die.
Okay, so you have to re-roll it. Okay, I see.
Because it essentially, the idea is that the prompts give you any number of ways to break those rules in order to make it become possible.
Okay, cool.
And the goal of the design of this one was to make it especially impossible, so you'd have to be relying on those prompts a lot.
Yeah.
So yeah, those are the three games I came up with.
Sweet.
So yeah, I've written down here a bunch of like ideas for how mechanically the prompts could affect the game state, but how those translate, like what is the fictional prompt that would make sense in the combination of mechanic and fiction to alter the game state, feels like it's a really open territory that I would be so interested in your thoughts on. Like, if players are trying to locate an astronaut and prompts allow them to better communicate their location, or prompts allow them to get oxygen, reduce their stress and get oxygen back, I would love to know from you what type of prompt you think really fictionally represents that mechanic.
My internal, like, the thing I became nervous about was making the prompts matter. like making it matter, that things are shared, that details are shared, that these connections are made. Because people are dying, like that's a big part of the concept, but I think that as a player, I would hit a point of frustration fairly quickly with like, do I just have to keep generating details forever to win specific games? Like, I think I just, like, does that make sense? Like, I can't quite find the satisfaction of the connection yet. There's something missing.
That totally makes sense. And I think in some of my original vision of some of these games, I was thinking much more you were only going to intervene a maximum of once. And that was very connected to this vision I have of what tethers were and how they formed and how they built up over time in like a meta progression level.
Mm-hmm.
And as I moved away from that, I moved into a lot more like prompting repeatedly.
What do you mean moved away from it?
Oh, just that I like decided to try and design them much more self-contained rather than about some sort of meta level progression.
Okay.
And that also moved me in a direction of like, you're answering prompts more to do this thing more. But I think probably my designs even show how much they came out of that other line of thinking, because originally, like, my ideas for how prompts fit in mechanically was less shift a die slightly or recover dice that you recover over and over again, and it was more set the exact result of a die. It was clear this hurdle. It was when you do a prompt, you stop the timer, you do the prompt, and then whatever you were trying to do right now just works. Yeah. And so that makes it a much bigger moment when it happens. And you don't have to come up with a bunch of small answers over and over again. And there's even room for both, maybe? Like there's prompts that you can only do once that are a big deal, or there's just keep talking about one of your details, and as long as you keep talking, you get to keep doing this other one that has a smaller effect. So they could scale, or we could just do shifting the design back to what was closer to my original thought of like, you do one big thing and it just works. And I think I moved away from that also because I wanted players who were not the living astronaut in the later game to just get to be more involved. But there are other ways to accomplish that. There are so many other ways to accomplish that.
Yeah, I think I lean towards both, but heavier, leaning more towards the direction of sharing a fun little story about your life just fixes the problem.
Yes, totally.
Not entirely. I think probably like increasingly so, right? And I think that like this is something that can be different in different games as well. Like you bringing back up the idea of like, we pause the timer as long as somebody keeps talking. Like being able to, if you're like doing something really fiddly and turning to the character that you know is just an anecdote sharing type person and just asking like, or being able to offer like, my character does a lot of like long anecdotes. Here, I can give you 45 seconds. And then hitting the timer, and literally you have to talk the entire time. If you pause for more than a second, the timer immediately starts up again.
Totally.
But I think it'll be more satisfying if they're more impactful, because I don't know what it would. I'm imagining the feeling of like being like, oh, I have something perfect, and sharing it and it not helping. Totally. And I'm more so imagining that happening 5 times in a row.
Yeah, in a very
and then being like,
way.
Fuck, okay. Like, you know?
Honestly, what you're describing is really more in line with my initial vision. And I think it was anxiety about players not having enough to do, but I think having an impactful thing to do matters more. And also we can just extend how long it takes to realize some of these prompts in a way that itself gives them more participation.
Yeah, and the other thing that I really want to bring up that like blew my mind when I played Firebrands again for the first time in a really long time last year. One of the things that Firebrands does that I think all GM-less games should just take is solitaire. In Firebrands, if everyone else at the table is at a scene, is in a scene, they're playing a group minigame. There is a minigame called Solitaire that you can just play by yourself, and it generates a little story. And then when you get back into the scene, you can like share some of it as a rumor sometimes. Like you can be like, oh, I heard that, or you might be prompted at some point in some of the mini games, like do Solitaire and then share like, what did people hear? What's the story that people hear from what you did? And I truly think that 95% of GM-less games should have that. And I think that is definitely a thing that we can look at here. And some of that might mean some like, okay, your character died, so you can generate some backstory stuff, but also you can now do the comet minigame. You're playing a comet, do a little comet minigame. What does that mean? I don't know. But you can do your comet minigame while everyone else is doing their group thing. You know what I mean? Like, because I hear you on not wanting people to not have something to do, but oh my god, I just want to evangelize Solitaire from Firebrands at every opportunity I get.
Oh, no, that is such a good idea. And just like, I think really solves a bunch of this design problem. And also, like, I feel like we've talked about all of this, like, need to flesh out, or like, both need and desire to flesh out backstory as you play.
Yeah.
And these ideas of like, well, are you going to have enough detail about your character in the moment where you need to communicate it? I love the idea of like, you've got these massive tables of like character details and like generation and possibilities.
Mm-hmm.
What if that just expands into Solitaire? Like, what if you just keep fleshing out what some of these things mean for your character? What if you're playing a solo journaling game, writing about how these details have manifested in your life already?
Mm-hmm.
Anytime that you have a certain amount of downtime. And I also think you would knock that out of the park.
Mm-hmm.
And so then getting to plug these two things together so they each sort of fill the gaps in the other feels so cool to me.
Yeah, totally.
And that means that when you have to come in and answer a prompt and give an anecdote or whatever, you have all of this detail that you have been solitairing out.
Yeah.
And so you can now draw upon all of that. And that means also, if we're doing some of those prompts being like, talk as long as you can or give as many relevant details as you can,
mm-hmm.
the better you've been solitairing,
the
more you've got to work with. And so I really, really like that.
Cool. Yeah. Cool. I think that sounds really good. What do we want to walk out of here with today?
I think the thing I personally want the most is playable minigames that I could take to a table and just run the minigame and test it.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, I was pretty close to that. I wanted to do a bunch of dice rolling and testing if these actually like worked, but I did not get to that point.
Uh-huh.
The main thing it would need is, what do the prompts do and what are the prompts? And then based on everything we just talked about at a like meta level, I really like the design of these mini games and the design of how the prompts interact is so much easier with the existence of Solitaire.
Yeah.
And so what if in that case you and I, for each of these mini games, just talked out what could prompts be and do?
Yeah.
And what would those prompts be per mini game?
Yeah.
Cool. I know this is strange, but could we start with the second one with Lost in Space? Because I feel like Tool Toss is the one where I felt the least confident about how prompts interact with it.
Yeah,
so I just feel like it would be setting ourselves up for success to start with that one.
Yeah.
Hell yeah. Okay, so in our Lost in Space game, we've got these two running totals, and we're trying to get them in sync. And the lone astronaut is saying, oh, you're closer, you're farther, I can see you coming, and we're communicating in radio dialogue, like our relative positions. And then, if we want to have these really super impactful prompts, there's the very powerful game elements that I see. I'm going to sort of put those to you and then ask fictionally what would that maybe be.
Mm-hmm.
Hugely powerful game elements are reveal your current position. So if you are the lone astronaut, just here's the number.
Mm-hmm.
Or choose the result of your next die roll. So you have to pick a die and you just say, this one's going to be a 7. Or say exactly the difference between your two numbers. So if you're the lone astronaut, you get to say, we are 5 apart.
Yeah.
And you can't say the direction, but you can say how many.
Mm-hmm.
These are examples to me of what are actions that would have a massive result. And my question to you is then, for actions like those, which I could write down if that's helpful, what are fictional prompts that you think would make sense as representing that?
Do they have to be literal? Like, do they have to actually directly address this?
Oh,
because
good question.
my thought was a little more abstract, just thinking of, especially with like what we talked about of like calming someone down by like sharing an anecdote or something, and that lets them focus enough to reveal their position or something, you know?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question, because when I was thinking about these having more like direct metaphors, that was also when I was thinking about like, well, dice are oxygen, and maybe getting your dice back is something that is often a thing that these prompts do, and therefore that literal would be easier. But when we're having them make such a big difference, there isn't a literal translation that you could as guarantee would be on your character sheet. It was easier to do literal when they were smaller, and won't be as much when they have this bigger narrative impact. And so I think you are right to label them. Maybe we should move away from them being so literal metaphors and have them be much more abstract. Might be a good idea.
The other question I have, and I know that part of this is just balancy type stuff that is hard to say, how long do you see this going?
Yeah, that was the reason I was hoping I would have time to throw a bunch of dice on my desk.
But like in your ideal, or how many rounds maybe is the question?
It also depends, do we want mini games to all have approximately the same length, or how much variety do we want? And then also larger questions of how much playtime do we want overall for a game of this? I had been envisioning 5 to 10 minutes for a mini game. So that's about what I was thinking here. I definitely want this game to go to at least 2 rounds, because I want the lone astronaut's position to change at least once. I think it is much more interesting if you let that happen. We could even put artificial limitations on when you can do a prompt. So like, if prompts are so powerful, I had a worry of like, well, what if someone just the first thing they do is does it and then solves the problem on the first turn?
Well, presumably that's already possible if you're rolling a d20 and the other people are rolling a d20, right?
Yeah, that's probably a fiddly bit that I would need to change that would come up in playtesting. But with a somewhat blind guess on the first edition of Subtraction, it would be crazy unlikely, but it is possible.
I think I don't even really know what the like, there's, offer an anecdote to try and calm someone down. There's trying to give helpful advice. I'm not sure what else can be done in this situation. Or rather, something that isn't... Because we can't say, oh, I'm using my expertise in this to get closer to this person. Because that's not guaranteed. That's not in our control, right? That's totally the dice. And so, like, what it means to... Yeah, that I'm just not sure.
One, I think the calming someone down is really compelling in this one, especially. If I think about the movie, one of the times that Sandra Bullock's character not being able to stay calm is the biggest problem, is when she is free floating away. And it's such a large element that I think, even though that is something that would almost always be relevant, it feels like it would be especially impactful and relevant here. And I actually thought of a way to solve a mechanical design issue at the same time, which is the lone astronaut doesn't just roll their d20, they roll their d20 and their d12 and their d8 at the beginning, so they start on a lower set of dice. And so they have that feeling of oxygen pressure much sooner than everyone. And so, like, just the idea of distracting them to keep their oxygen supply up just feels more thematically impactful.
I think that helped me zero in on one of the conflicts that I'm having. The prompts are all supposed to help the lone astronaut, but the lone astronaut can't do anything about the situation, right? And so it's like, they can get oxygen. You can only give them time.
Yeah,
right?
Totally.
Like, you can't share something that then helps you get to that person,
the actual goal.
And so I've
got an idea for that too. Because the other thing that I was going to say is, the other thing that is powerful to do here in a secret information game is reveal information. And it made me realize that you said, like, oh, you can't guarantee that your skill is going to help you get closer because that depends on the die roll. I actually think you can make it guarantee you get closer by if sharing an anecdote about that like, or if lending someone your skills, the mechanical effect is my position is currently lower than yours, and so you're allowed to communicate higher or lower in number. And then if you roll on the die greater than my current location, I can tell you that and you can re-roll. And so basically it's like you get information from the lone astronaut, you get more precise information, and you are guaranteed not to overshoot. You can't fuck up. And so the outcome always puts you closer. You say, I'm a lower result. And then they say, okay, cool, I'll roll my d8. And if you rolled a 2, it's like, okay, cool, you're coming closer. And if you rolled a 7, they go, that's too far, don't do that, and roll again. So you are guaranteed to help in some way. I don't know if that's not a big enough impact, but...
No, I think that all makes sense. I think how I'm weirdly feeling here is I don't know that this benefits from constant narrative. Like, because, I mean, definitely, like, sharing something at some point, but, like, I think if people are focused on communicating about numbers and the prompts, whatever they are, have a big impact, but they're not all the time. Like, they're not, you don't have to have a prompt every time you roll or something. They just have a big effect and they change. Just because, like, I think that it might actually feel a little like stop and start in a not super fun way to try and have the detail sharing be like consistent, like, or constant.
Okay, here's another version that actually also meets a design thing that you talked about of having it be necessary, not optional, which is once you get within a certain distance, so like if the lone astronaut knows that you're within 3, they say, I can see you, and now you have to do a prompt in order to retrieve them.
What if also the only thing that the prompts do essentially in this game is reset your O2? Like, if you've rolled 5 dice and it's not working, you can go to the, like, reset your O2 thing.
Yeah, one of my first prompt ideas was prompts refresh O2 down here, so I'm super into that.
Yeah.
I want to pitch combining that with what I was saying about sort of finishing with a prompt, so we get both prompts that help and could come up, and a prompt that is necessary to finish that could also be flavored differently, which is to say, if you would run out of O2, you have to do a prompt, and then you can refresh your O2.
Mm-hmm.
And then once you have the same position, one of the things I was thinking about when I designed this was, like, I say locate and retrieve, but then I don't do anything with retrieve. Once you have the same position, this minigame always ends on a prompt, which is flavored a little differently because you're in the same position, and now you need to give some sort of advice for how to actually grab onto them, how to actually get them reattached and back in the group.
Mm-hmm.
And so the 2 prompt opportunities are, if you run out of O2, prompt to refresh, and when you succeed, prompt to give a tip to make it actually possible to retrieve them. And those have different fictional... The first fictional positioning is calm them down, and the second fictional positioning is talk them through how to do this process using some expertise you have.
I think that's close. I'm wondering, how do you feel about the idea that the when you are in the same position prompt is more of an individual, everyone answers a question. Everyone answers when is a time, write down a time in your life that you remember thinking you were alone and then realizing you weren't.
Oh, totally.
And it's like,
I think that's really compelling.
so you have these little things, and I think that everyone answers a question like that, and then maybe in order to succeed, you have to create a certain number of tethers, which means sharing one last thing, you know? Like, it's close to, like, once we've gotten, here's one of the things, once we're in the same position, just making it, you pretty much succeeded, you know? Like, you did it. And so it's just flavoring the, like, unless it's specifically interesting for this game to be like, you can try so hard for this whole time and then that person can still die, which I think there's a point in the game where that kind of thing makes sense. Instead, having it be the, like, yeah, okay, you all come together and now in order for it to succeed, share something about yourself. And theoretically, there is a failure state where if you don't have any tethers left to share, whatever that means, then it does fail. And of course, that's unlikely if you're, like, generating something right away. I'm just thinking of it like there are possible failure states that's like you can't do the final thing because you've already shared all of the details or whatever.
Interesting.
I don't know. That's probably just kind of big picture stuff. But yeah, generally I think thinking of it as like a final thematic question or a couple thematic questions that people can choose from that help them make a character, like figure out more stuff in their character's backstory. Makes sense to me.
I really like that final thematic question. It actually is something that, like, we could take into the design of other games. We don't, like, have to, but, like, into the design of other mini games, because you talked about wanting to make sure prompts have to happen, right?
Yeah.
And so the idea of, like, every mini game ends on a you've done it, now share something relevant about yourself or how you feel or journal it or whatever.
Yeah.
Like, that connects to the themes rather than having to try and, like, shoehorn in the story while you're accomplishing the activity.
Mm-hmm.
Ending each one on, and now make a poignant moment that sums up the feeling of the rest of this.
Yeah.
I think is a really nice structure.
Yeah.
Okay, so I wrote those down as prompts. I also really quick just changed the starting positions to be Lone Astronaut rolls their D20, D12, and D8 and adds them together,
Mm-hmm.
and the searching group rolls their D4.
Yeah.
Technically, 1, 1, 2, and 2, 1, 1 and stuff are still possible, but it's, and a 3 or a 4, but it's so unlikely that...
So are the other astronauts working, like, rolling as a group? Like, they're making a group pool?
Yes, exactly. My idea was that, like, they are maintaining a mathematical total, and each is rolling one at a time and adding or subtracting from that running number.
Cool.
That's a playable minigame if we have prompts. Like,
that feels great to me. We have our game. We have at least the beginning of a game that might, in fact, be a whole game. That's the thing about games, is you can just link them together if you want.
And you also don't know until you take it to the table. That's the other thing here, is that we've done the process of, like, sketching out a game, but part of development is also after it goes to the table. And so on this podcast, we have done as much as you need to do to be able to go to the next step of how a game is made. And I feel really great about that.
Yay. Well, in that case, I guess, Jess, do you have any plugs?
Yeah, I'm Jess. You can find me everywhere as jessfrom.online or jessfrom.online. You can find my games as Jumpgate Games. I made games like Going Rogue 2E, I Have the High Ground, and Planet Fist. Oh, and a recent one, The Vatican Stole the Menorah and We're Gonna Steal It Back, which you can go and get on my itch right now. I'm also going to be printing trifolds of that. That'll probably be available sometime around when this is coming out. So that'll be exciting. And yeah, you can find all that stuff and more, my writing and other things, on my website.
Yay! I've been Satah. You can find me on Bluesky at satahchips.gaygothvibes.online. You can check out my website at gaygothvibes.online. I edit games. I make a podcast called Folio that is multi-guest actual play of solo games. I feel like I had a fun little bit that I ended the last recordings with, but I don't remember what it was. I think it was probably something like, This Should Be a Game, the podcast about the moment where you say this should be a game.
This should be a game.
That's the one. On the Patreon today, you can get the rules that we sketched out during this episode, as well as some other things like the notes that we took while watching the movies. As a patron, you'll also be able to vote for genres and movies that we'll cover and send in audio messages for the mechanical mailbag episodes. Follow the show on Bluesky at thisshouldbeaga.me and join our Discord at discord.thisshouldbeaga.me to talk games with us. Thank you to Cris, Viana for the logo and Nicky Flowers for the theme song. See you in 2 weeks for the first episode of our series on The Martian with Caleb Zane Hewitt.
Hell yeah, we did it.
We did it.
Game design.